Hello and welcome to this video where we'll be sewing the Liverpool pattern together. This is a zip-up sweatshirt sewing pattern with hood or high collar, drop shoulders, and kangaroo patch pockets with a comfortable volume. The model is quite loose-fitting with a slightly oversized cut. We've reinterpreted it in our own way with different options to bring you a timeless mixed pattern that will appeal to toddlers and teens alike. Let's go through the technical features and characteristics of this pattern together. Let's start with the two collar options that are available, a fully lined hood or a high collar. Both offer meticulous finishes. The hood is lined and finished with a bias binding at the neckline. On the collar, the seam allowances are enclosed. The sweatshirt closes with a separable zipper sewn to the middle front and finished with a finishing tape. The sleeves are long and finished with ribbed cuffs, just like the lower body. Two optional front kangaroo patch pockets. They are inserted into the zipper seam and the rib seam. There's also the option of a cutout front to play with patterns and colors in a color block spirit. On the blue version, we've opted for top stitching on all seams. This is entirely optional, but the stitching adds to the sportswear effect. If you choose to add top stitching, take care not to pull on the fabric when sewing, as this would cause it to curl, which would not be very aesthetically pleasing. This model is designed to be assembled on the serger, but you can also sew it on your sewing machine. You just need to make a few adjustments, such as the type of stitch you're going to use. We've put together all our tips for sewing knitwear on the sewing machine in a dedicated video tutorial, which I recommend you watch before embarking on this project. If you're sewing on a sewing machine, you can start by overcasting all the pieces in the pattern with your machine's zigzag stitch. However, this is not essential. The knit will not fray over time. You can choose to leave the edges raw. The skill level is easy to intermediate. The main difficulty with this pattern lies in the zipper assembly seam. The seams at the collar, pockets, and yokes need to be aligned, which isn't always easy when working with knit fabrics. This requires precision to achieve a beautiful result. We offer an additional finish for the zipper, which is optional. If you want to go faster or for beginners, you can skip this step. But as usual, you'll find that if you take your time and are precise in your ironing and assembly, everything goes off without a hitch. What's more, the choice of fabric can have a significant influence on the difficulty. For a beginner, it's probably best to choose a fabric with no pattern connections, such as checks or a stable, smooth material. For example, if you're new to knitwear, I wouldn't recommend using Sherpa or Teddy, as in this version, as the hairs will get in the way and you will lack precision. You can also find very stretchy knits, which won't be as easy to work with. Let's take a look at the choice of fabrics. This pattern is designed for knits, in other words, knitted and non-woven materials that are stretchy. When it comes to knits, almost anything can be used. For temperate seasons, you can opt for French terry cloth, waffle jersey, or even quilted jersey, which we don't have here at the workshop. For winter, we prefer fleece of varying thickness, Nikki velvet, full Milano knit, or Sherpa on a knit base. For the hood lining, you can use the main fabric or a matching fabric. We recommend that you don't choose something too thick and adapt your choice of fabric for the lining to the outer fabric. For example, if the body and hood are made from Sherpa, it's best to opt for a thinner, matching jersey for the hood lining. You'll also need ribbing for the cuffs and lower body band. Tubular versions are available, which can be cut on one side to create a flat fabric from which to cut your pieces. For the hooded option, the neckline bias binding is designed to be cut in the fabric, but there's nothing to stop you using a commercial bias binding, which will then contrast. This makes no difference to assembly, and you can follow the same steps. The finishing tape for the zipper is also designed to be cut from fabric. You can also use a commercial bias binding. We'll talk more about this later when we come to cutting the fabric. On the high collar version, the seam allowances are caught in the collar top stitching, so there is no bias binding for this version. In terms of supplies, you'll need a zipper. Be careful, it must be separable. You can use nylon, metal, or plastic zippers. It's often difficult to find exact lengths on the market. Standard lengths are 30, 35, or 40 centimeters, for example. If you can't find the exact length for your project, it's best to choose a slightly longer zipper and shorten it. By the way, we have a dedicated video tutorial with all our tips for shortening your zipper, which we invite you to watch. To make it easier to assemble the zipper on stretch knitwear, we strongly recommend fusing the middle front. This prevents the knit from stretching and curling. Be careful not to stretch your material during installation. We recommend using a band of stable munch. I'll show you what it looks like. It's a pre-cut band of iron-on fabric with a chain that won't come undone. This allows knit and woven fabrics to be sewn together, as shown here with the zipper. If you don't have stable munch, you can also use woven fusible interfacing, which is cut into a centimeter-wide band. We're going to take a look at the different sewn versions to discover various renderings. Let's start with this blue hooded version made from a thick brushed fleece. This fabric is ideal for a warm version. We chose a perfectly matched ribbing for the finishes, which we also use to cut the finishing tapes to avoid over-thickness. This is an essential basic for any wardrobe. This version has front pockets. We've chosen to make all 3 versions with pockets, but you can of course decide not to add them. It doesn't make any difference to the assembly, you just have to skip the patch pocket assembly steps. For the rest, follow the same steps. Then we have this version with a cutout and a high collar. Here, we had some fun with the cutout to create a color block effect. In this case, I'd advise you to choose fabrics of roughly equivalent weights. Otherwise, the result may not be very harmonious. We've used thick fleece available in several colors, but you could make this version with several French terry, for example. The third version is a high-collared leopard Sherpa sweater. It's not the easiest to make, particularly where the zipper and top stitching are concerned, which can be tricky to execute. But you'll get a very fashionable result. Before we start assembling the garment, let's look at a few specific points concerning the cutting of the pieces. Let's start with the cuffs and lower body band, which should be cut from rib knit fabric. This fabric is very stretchy, making for tight-fitting pieces that are easy to pull back into place. We advise against making these pieces in the main fabric. However, if the main fabric is very stretchy, you can make the whole garment in a single fabric. In this case, you'll need to lengthen pieces 7, corresponding to the cuffs, and pieces 8 and 9, which are the lower body bands at the front and back, by around 10%. It is not necessary to alter the height of these pieces. Other pieces can be cut either from the main fabric or in ribbing. This depends on your choice of fabric. For example, the lining of the hood could be cut in ribbing or in a jersey thinner than the main fabric. The same goes for the neckline bias binding and the finishing tapes on the zipper. For the high collar version, you could very well choose to cut the collar in a ribbing that matches the main fabric. Make sure you've transferred all the important notches and markings, which will be useful during assembly. We'll now move on to overcasting the pieces, which can be done either with the zigzag stitch on the sewing machine or with the overcasting of the serger. The pockets will be serged as shown here: pocket tops, openings, and sides. You can then iron the pieces that need it. I chose to group everything together at the beginning to do it all at once. I like to do it this way, as it allows me to be more efficient by ironing the pieces one after the other while the iron is still hot. Once all the pieces have been ironed, all that's left to do is sew. We start by hemming the pocket openings, 2 centimeters from the edge of the fabric, wrong sides together. This can be a bit scary, as it involves 2 opposing curves. But with knit fabric, it almost goes without saying. I start by marking 2 centimeters on each side of the opening. Then using my metal ruler, I mark the fold all along the rounding. I place a few pins to help hold the hem in place. Next, fold the sides and top of the pockets over 7 millimeters. I do the same for the second pocket. Next, I make a 2 centimeters tuck on the edge of the hood on piece 12, which is the outer hood band, and on pieces 11, which are the outer hoods. I use my special ironing ruler, which is very handy for achieving precise hems. I fold the ribbed cuffs and lower body in half lengthwise, wrong sides together, then iron them. If you've decided on the hooded version, fold and press the neckline bias binding in half, bringing both selvages towards the center. To do this, I start by folding my band in half, edge to edge. Then I use this fold to bring the 2 ends towards the middle of the band. If you've chosen to make the high collar version, iron a 7 mm tuck along one length of the collar. We're now ready to start assembling the garment. If you've opted for a front cutout, start by assembling the upper and lower parts of the front. Place the pieces right sides together, pin, then stitch 7 mm from the edge. If you're overcasting, place your fabric edge to edge with the knife to ensure that the 7 mm margins are respected. Then press the seams downwards. If you wish to add top stitching, you can do so here, 2 mm from the joining seam. For the pockets, I start by pinning and stitching the pre-shaped 2 cm hem at the openings. Normally, as the material is stretchy, you shouldn't have any trouble positioning the piece correctly. Next, I place the pockets on the fronts, aligning the selvages with the front middles and bottom of the pieces. The pre-shaped hems on the top and sides of the pockets should line up with the markings on the pieces. Pin in place. Stitch at 2 mm on all sides, except at the pocket entrance, which is already hemmed. I prefer to start the seams on either side of the pocket opening. This way, if my pocket loosens up a little when sewing, the offset will be melted into the seam of the zipper or lower body. I'll show you once sewn on the other side. Optionally, you can reinforce the pocket entries with a board-in stitch. I use the zigzag stitch on my sewing machine, reducing the width and length of the stitch and going back and forth a long way. To be precise and to get symmetrical seams, I count the number of stitches I make on the way out and on the way back. Feel free to do a few tests on a scrap of fabric beforehand. I take my time with visible top stitching, as it will be on the front of the garment and therefore very visible. If a board-in stitch is used, I pass the threads from the end of the seam to the wrong side of the garment using a seam ripper, then tie a knot and cut the threads 1 cm from the knot. This prevents the seam from unraveling over time. I don't need to do this with the threads from the beginning of the seam as I've gone back and forth. You do the same thing on both sides, trying to be symmetrical. I'll show you the result once the pockets are stitched. Next, we move on to assembling the body and sleeves. Start by placing the front and back right sides together. Align the selvages and pin the shoulders. Repeat on the second front, then join at 7 mm. Press the seam towards the back, and optionally top stitch at 2 mm. I do the same on the other side. Place the sleeves right sides together with the body armholes. The sleeves are symmetrical, so you can use either one or the other. Pin in place. When pinning, I pay close attention to the markings. First pin the front end, then the back end. Next, place the sleeve cap marker at the body assembly seam, then distribute the clips on each side. Stitch at 7 mm, then repeat on the second sleeve. Press the seam towards the body. Optionally, top stitch at 2 mm. I'll show you how it looks on the other sleeve. Finally, we sew the sides of the sleeves and body. We place the back, front, and sleeves right sides together. Take time to align the seam under the armholes. Pin, then stitch at 7 mm. Here's the result. Under the sleeves, the seams are well aligned. Now it's time to admire your sweater taking shape. Press the seams towards the back of the garment. It's difficult to top stitch under the sleeves as the diameter is too small. If you still want to top stitch, we advise you to do so only from the bottom of the sides to the armholes. We'll now assemble the rib knit bands on the cuffs and lower body. I'll start with the lower body. Place the front bands on the back bands, right sides together. Pin and stitch at 7 mm. I press my side seams towards the front bands with my iron. As a general rule, we iron towards the back. Here I'm ironing towards the front to avoid excess thickness when joining with the rest of the garment. I've pre-folded my bands wrong sides together with my iron, but I make sure the fold is well marked. Then place the ribbing band, folded in half, on the right side of the body. Align the selvages of the band ends and the middle front. Pin starting from the middle front and middle back, using the notches. Then pin the sides. As you can see, this is where the thicknesses can be a little too important at the side seams. which is why I've folded the seam allowances of the rib edge band towards the front of the garment. Then pin at regular intervals, stretching slightly. Stitch the band at 7 millimeters. I like to iron the seam allowances on both the wrong side and the right side, as shown here. As an option, you can top stitch 2 millimeters from the seam. Note that you'll need to stretch the ribbing slightly again to avoid creasing the seam. Remember not to pull too hard on the body of the sweater, or it may curl. Next, we'll assemble the sleeve finish bands. Fold the cuff bands right sides together to match the short sides, then stitch at 7 millimeters. Turn them inside out and, thanks to the pre-marked fold, you'll have double folded bands right sides together. The seam allowances are thus hidden on the inside. Place the cuff bands around the sleeves right sides together and pin. Be sure to align the sleeve seams with the band seams, as well as the sleeve center and band center marks. The sleeve seam allowances should face backwards. As for the lower body, to avoid excess thickness, I orient the band seams in the opposite direction. Stitch at 7 millimeters, stretching the band to adjust the lengths. I'll show you on the second sleeve already sewn. Then iron the seam allowances to the sleeve. As an option, you can top stitch the seam allowances 2 millimeters from the assembly. I'll show you the result. Now we can start assembling the collar onto the garment. We'll start with the high collar version. A detailed explanation of the hooded version will follow in the next chapter. We place the length of the collar that has no tuck, right sides together along the neckline, making sure to match the markings on the two pieces. I start by aligning the back middles together, then match the collar shoulder mark with the shoulder seam. I finish by aligning the ends together, then do the same on the other side. I then continue my pinning by stretching the collar piece slightly to fit the neckline. We end up by stitching at 7 millimeters. Iron the seam allowances towards the collar. The next step for this version will be the assembly of the zipper. Next, we'll look at how to assemble the hood. First, we assemble the outer hood, then the hood lining, and finally the two together. Pin the outer hood band right sides together on the rounded edge of one side of the outer hood. You'll need to align the selvages of the two pieces and match the notches to position your pieces correctly. I start by pinning the two ends of the band and hood, then pin the notches on both pieces. Now I pin or place clips at regular intervals all along the seam. Since these are two opposite curves, it's not necessarily easy to pin them, but the knit helps. Stitch at 7 millimeters. Fold the seam towards the band. Optionally, you can top stitch this seam at 2 millimeters. I do the same on the other side, then on the lining. The result is two hoods. The outer hood is slightly deeper than the inner. This will be used to create a tuck for a nice finish. You can now place the outer hood and lining right sides together, aligning the right selvages. Stitch at 7 millimeters. Fold the seam towards the hood lining using an iron. Turn inside out, then slide the lining into the outer hood, wrong sides together. The outer fabric hood folds back 2 centimeters into the hood lining. Since we pre-marked these folds with an iron at the start of the seam, it's a no-brainer. I like to hold the neckline selvages together with clips to make sure everything fits. This band is top stitched 1.8 centimeters from the edge of the hood to hold everything in place. The seam joining the two hoods is not caught in this seam. The hood is complete. Now we'll assemble it to the body of the sweater. We'll join the hood to the body neckline. To do this, pin right sides together, aligning the bottom selvages, the bottom of the hood with the front neckline. The hood should begin and end 1 centimeter from the front middles at the markings. Start by pinning the ends, then the shoulder and mid-back markings. Finally, place pins at regular intervals. Stitch at 7 millimeters along the neckline. The hood is now assembled to the body. The neckline bias binding is sewn on after the zipper assembly. In this chapter, we'll look at how to assemble the zipper to the front middles. We start with the interfacing, which will be placed only on the middle front to facilitate the sewing of the zipper. The wrong side of the front pieces is interfaced in the middle. As we've already seen, we prefer to use stable manche, a small fusible band designed for this purpose. If you don't have any, you can use fusible interfacing band instead. On the bottom of the garment, stop the interfacing band before the ribbing seam. If you're making the front yoke version, be sure to fold the yoke seam allowances down. For the high collar version, we place the interfacing up to the mid-collar mark, passing over the seam allowances that have been folded down towards the collar. We take our separable zipper. If necessary, shorten it to the desired length. I've got a nylon zipper, so I'm going to remove the stoppers from the top of my zipper before cutting the teeth. Then I remove them from the seam using pliers. It may sound scary, but it's actually quite easy. If, like me, you have a zipper that's much longer than the required measurement, you don't need to cut all the teeth. You mark the desired position of the end of the zip. Cut the teeth about 3 centimeters above this mark and cut the excess braid above it. At the end, I replace my stoppers just below the desired length with flat nose pliers. For the high collar option, the closure stops at the mid-collar mark. For the hooded option, the zipper stops 1 centimeter from the top of the fronts. The most technical part of fitting the zipper is getting the pockets, collar, and cutout to coincide perfectly for an aesthetically pleasing result. Take your time and apply yourself. I start with the right side, the slider side. I prefer it this way so that when I sew the second braid, which will be more meticulous to ensure a good fit, I won't be bothered by the slider. Open the zipper, then place the zipper side on the middle right front, right sides together. Pin carefully. We recommend that you start the zipper 1 or 2 millimeters above the fold of the lower body band for a nice finish later on. This will ensure that the bottom of the slider is aligned with the ribbing. The top of the zipper should be positioned at the collar notch. For the hooded version, on the other hand, the top of the closure must be positioned 1 centimeter from the end of the top of the front. When pinning, I take care to lay the seam allowances in the right direction. Once the zipper is pinned, stitch at 1 centimeter, then I show you on the machine. We'll use a special zipper presser foot. Shift the needle a little so that it is 1 centimeter from the edge of the zipper. Start with a stop stitch. Then move forward. As you approach the zipper slider, stick the needle into the fabric, lift the presser foot, and move the slider to the other side of the foot. Then lower the foot and continue stitching, finishing with a few back and forth stitches. We'll do the same on the other side. For this step, to perfectly align the pockets, collar, and lower body band, I like to add an extra step. I close the zipper before assembling the second side, then use an erasable pen or chalk to trace the various markings: the yoke, the collar assembly seam, the top of the pocket, and the ribbing. This way, when I pin the second half of the zipper on the other side, I can be sure that the different pieces are aligned and symmetrical on each side of the zipper. I check this by zipping up the sweatshirt. Eventually, if I see that I've got a gap in one place, I don't hesitate to undo and redo my seam so that everything lines up properly. Here's the result. If you've chosen to sew the high collar version, you now need to fold the collar over the zipper. Start by folding the end of the zipper at right angles to the outside of the garment. Then fold a second time so that the folded edge of the zipper lines up with the notch. I'll show you how. Next, fold the collar over the zipper. I fold the collar in half with right sides together at the fold we've performed and the notch so as to sandwich the zipper. I'm careful to fold the 7 millimeters fold I performed at the beginning, wrong sides together. On the inside, the collar should extend slightly beyond the seam connecting the collar to the body. Pin, then stitch along the previous seam line. I can trim off the upper corners of the neckline, as well as the tuck and front seam allowances, before turning the collar inside out. This is how it looks. If you've chosen to sew the hooded version, you'll now need to assemble the neckline bias binding to hide the raw edges of this version's neckline. After trimming and cutting the top of the zipper in line with the seam allowances, we take the neckline bias binding previously folded lengthwise in thirds. Place this bias binding right sides together, aligning the selvages along the neckline from one end to the other. Stitch at 7 mm along the previous seam, starting and stopping about 1 cm from the ends of the fronts. This leaves 1 cm of bias binding free on each side. Fold the bias binding over the zipper, sandwiching it in place. Fold the bias binding over 7 mm, wrong sides together. Pin, then stitch along the previous seam line. On this version, I'm not trimming off the corners yet. I'm waiting until I've applied my finishing tape. If you don't apply this band, you can trim and turn over and go straight to finishing the hood. We'll then apply a 3 cm wide finishing tape to the edges of the zipper and the middle front for a nice finish. As mentioned earlier, you can choose to skip this step, especially if you're new to sewing. Start by placing the finishing tape right side up against the wrong side of the zipper, aligning the selvages. Pin along the entire length, leaving the tape 1 cm above the bottom of the zipper. For the collar, it all depends on your choice. If you've chosen the high collar, you'll need to extend the end of the band about 1 cm beyond the collar assembly seam. If you've chosen the hooded version, you'll need to align the edge of the finishing tape with the assembly seam of the collar and hood. Stitch at 1 cm from the selvages. Normally, this falls at the seam where the zipper joins the middle front. Repeat the same operation on the other side. We now finish the ends of the 2 finishing tapes. Only the lower ends are concerned by this finish. The band is folded lengthwise like an accordion, as shown here. The band is folded in 3, wrong sides together on the sewn side and right sides together on the unsewn side. Secure with a pin. The lower ends can be stitched in continuity with the edge fold. Here I can see that it's aligned, so I can trim off the corners at the top and bottom ends. We also trim the seam allowances in the middle front. Only the main fabric is cut, without trimming the zipper band. Now turn the finishing tape right side out. Take care to turn the corners. Please iron well at this stage for a neat result. By trimming the seam allowances and corners, the tape is easy to place. It wraps around the raw edges of the fabric and the braids of the zipper. I fold the band over tightly, using the width of the zipper as a guide, and iron to mark the fold. I add a few pins to hold my finishing tape in place. Fold the zipper to the inside of the fronts and pin along the bias binding on the outside. This is how it looks. We'll top stitch from the bottom up on the outside of the band. This will hold the zipper and finishing tape in place. I'll start at the bottom to make sure there's no gap at the end of the zipper and that I'm aligned. This part is going to be very visible. This is one of the trickiest stitches in the entire pattern, and the key is to get it looking good on the right side of the garment. For the bias binding at the top, it's less of a problem, as we'll then enclose the end of the band in the collar or hood finish. We stop at the collar or hood assembly seam. The bias binding sticks out a little, about 1 cm. This is normal. This chapter covers only the finishes on the high collar. Neckline finishes for the hooded version will be explained in the next chapter. From here, we have 2 solutions. The first, which I'm going to use, is to pin the collar securely. But if you prefer, you can also base the collar instead of pinning it for an even more precise result. This is ideal, especially for fabrics that move and don't allow you to be precise enough. Next, stitch your rib into the collar seam. Now it's time to slip your size label into the seam. I'll show you when it's stitched. On the right side, the stitching is even and the result is very pretty. You can also see the wrong side. The stitching isn't exactly perfect, as it sometimes ends up just below the collar, but this isn't visible as we're on the wrong side. This chapter only concerns the hood option. I can trim off the corners in the middle front top and turn it inside out. This is how it looks. The neckline bias binding is folded down. The band is folded in 3. Pin the bias binding in place on the inside. Then stitch 1 millimeter from the edge of the bias binding. Now it's time to slip your size label into the seam. Let's stop at the zipper assembly and the front middles. Here's what it looks like when sewn. And now your Liverpool is complete. Here's an example of the 2 possible necklines, and we can see that you get very different results. Depending on fabrics and options, you'll get a sportier or more fashionable result. You shouldn't get bored with this essential pattern. If you like this video, don't hesitate to like it and subscribe to our channel. We can't wait to see your versions, so join us on Instagram with #EkityLiverpool. See you soon at Ekity.